Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to welcome Ustadha Sarah Sultan back to our community. A bit of background about her. Ustadha Sarah Sultan is a licensed professional counselor. She has a master's degree in mental health counseling and has practiced therapy for over 10 years. Okay. So Ustadha Sarah Sultan, she's an instructor at Mishka University and Al-Maghrib Institute, where she teaches courses about the intersection between Islam, psychology, and counseling. And she's also a research fellow with Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. So the topic for this evening will be the measure for our standards.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته everyone. Can you all hear me clearly? Is that good? Okay, alhamdulillah. Good. So I was asked to speak a little bit about one of the factors that can sometimes lead us to some doubts in our faith and to a struggle in our faith, which is when we struggle to hold on to the standards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we start to embrace the standards of people instead. So one thing I want to start with, inshallah, is it's really important to note that I think you can hear me even if it's not working, right? You can hear me clearly? Okay. Okay. I think it's a little bit in and out, but if you can hear me, it's good. So one thing that's important to realize, and I want to start with this point, is that we all experience ups and downs with regards to our iman, with regards to our faith. And this is normal. This is something that is part of being a Muslim, part of the struggle of this life, and something that we face. Even the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to have conversations with him about this particular struggle. One of his companions, Hanzala, came to him and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, when we're with you, you remind us of the fire, Jahannam, the hellfire, and the garden, which is Jannah, paradise, until it is as if we're seeing them with our own eyes. But when we depart from you, we attend to our wives, we attend to our children, we attend to our work and our businesses, and we forget a lot. We forget a great deal." And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ responded, like he didn't rebuke them. He didn't say, you should be constantly in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should be constantly thinking. He didn't say that. He said, "By the one in whose hand is my soul, if you continued as you are when you're with me and continued to remember paradise and hellfire so constantly, the angels would shake hands with you in your homes and on the streets. But there is a time for this and there is a time for that." And he said that 3 times. There's a time for this and there's a time for that. So these ups and downs that we experience are really normal. It's to be expected that when you're sitting in a gathering in the masjid, right, you're going to feel closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you go and you're, hanging out with your friends and with your family and things like that, you might experience a little bit of a different feeling, right? It doesn't bother me if it doesn't bother you because I'm a mom. So I'm good, alhamdulillah. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that, so when it comes to experiencing doubts, this is something that can be a really painful experience, right? I mean, I still remember some of the experiences that I've had where I've experienced a doubt and it hit me so hard, right? Where I started to wonder like, oh, is this the seed that's gonna take me down the wrong path and everything? And there's so much fear that can come up with that. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive my ummah for whatever crosses their minds as long as they don't speak of it or act upon it, right? So the doubts and the struggles that we have, as long as we're not, announcing them to everybody with pride, right? It's different if you talk to somebody for advice. And as long as we're not acting upon them, then we're not held accountable for them. It was even said that the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they came to him and they said that we find in ourselves thoughts that are too terrible to speak of, right? So terrible that we don't want to speak of them. We wouldn't dare utter them out loud. And the Prophet ﷺ said that, is this something that you really struggle with? Is this something that you really experience? And they said, yes, this is a struggle that we're having. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, that is a sign of clear faith. A sign of clear faith. Why? Because they had these doubts and they hated it so much. They had these negative thoughts, these difficult thoughts. They hated it so much. And that wishing that they didn't have these thoughts, that was a sign of clear faith. So if you're experiencing a feeling like, oh, I feel like I'm disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I feel like, I have some doubts, I have some struggles, and it is bothering you, that is a sign of clear faith. And that's a really beautiful thing, right? It's one of the ways that shaitan tries to get to us, but the fact that you dislike it, the Prophet ﷺ tells us, it's a sign of clear faith. So hold on to that. So even though we know that some of these thoughts and these struggles are normal, it's still very hard, and we still want to address them. You don't want to just leave it and let it grow. You want to address them. And so when we feel disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes it feels like our lives are just sweeping us along and we can't seem to get a grasp on things. And so Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said that about our hearts, he said that in our hearts there is a void that cannot be filled except by the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, turning to Him, always remembering Him and being sincere to Him. And were a person to be given the entire world and everything in it, that void will still not be filled. And that's the struggle, right? When we have doubts and when we hold on to a standard other than the standard of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that void is there and it's not being filled, because it can only be filled by a connection and a love and an attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what I want to do today is I want to focus on the root of one of these struggles, one of the things that can lead us to a struggle with our doubts. And that is that we live in a society where a lot of times the harmful things are praised and the things that we know to be good and healthy for our hearts and our souls are demonized. And these mixed messages can be very confusing and very difficult to navigate. And so it's really natural as human beings to want to belong, right? To want to be accepted by the people around you, to want to fit into the society that we live in. That is a natural human desire. And it hurts when you feel rejected by people, right? Like all of my sisters who wear hijab, if you've ever had negative experiences in wearing hijab, you know that that's hard. Even if you're doing the right thing, it's still hard and it still hurts, right? And so, this is something that's rooted in us from when we're really young. Like if you picture and you remember a time when you were young, or if you have children yourself, your kids, they come to you, they have this piece of art, and it's just like a scribble on a piece of paper. It doesn't even look like anything, right? If you're a parent, you've experienced that. And they come and they want you to say, wow, that's beautiful. Or they want you to say, wow, look at how blue it is, and all these different things. They want that validation. They want that validation. And we all have those moments, right, where we can remember feeling like the person sitting across from us was proud of us, valued what we brought to the table, right? And it felt so good. And we all have those moments where we felt like that didn't happen, where somebody that you wanted to please was not pleased with you, and how hard that is to have that kind of experience. We've all had that experience. And so that's normal, to want that validation, to want that approval, to want people to be happy with you and to be pleased with you and to like you. That's normal. There is even in the Quran, there's a verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to all of us, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time was experiencing a lot of abuse. People were shunning him. It was really hard to carry on with conveying the message of Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a verse that said, we know that you are saddened by what they say. We know you're saddened by what they say. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him, it's validation. It's that it's hard. It's hard to be turned away by the people who used to love you. It's hard to be on a path where you are a stranger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which shows us how normal it is to struggle with that. It's normal. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with this validation. The issue comes up when we prioritize pleasing people over pleasing Allah. When we prioritize embracing the standards of people so that they are pleased with us, so that we feel comfortable with them, rather than embracing the standard of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so dealing with this struggle, dealing with the doubts that might lead us to do this is really important, because when our doubts revolve around, like when we find our values shifting so that we can please people, what is happening in reality is that we are putting them first and we're putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala second. And if I was to ask any of you in this room, right, who's more important to you? Allah or the people around you, right? Like everybody would say that Allah is more important. If I was to say, what's more important? Allah being happy with you or people being happy with you? Everyone would say Allah being happy with me, right? Like we all rationally know this, but emotionally, we don't always live up to that. We struggle with that, right? And so when we base our standards on pleasing people, in reality, we're putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His standards second. We're saying that what people think about us is more important than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks about us. And Allah tells us in the Quran, He says, do you fear them, right? Do you fear these people? But Allah has more of a right that you should fear Him if you are truly believers. This is one of the defining factors in allowing us to be strong believers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is fearing Him more than we fear people. Because what happens when we embrace the standards of people and we strive to please people is we're saying we're more afraid of their reaction than we're afraid of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're more afraid of what they're going to think, them thinking badly of us, than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinking badly of us. And if we can reframe that in our minds to realize what we're doing when we're making those choices, it's a powerful experience to help us to make better choices, inshallah. So societal standards, right, and our emotional reaction to these standards, it's constantly fluctuating. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, each of us, do you guys know what that internal compass that is within each of us, we were created with it when we were born, do you know what that's called in Arabic? Fitra. Good. Exactly. Our fitra. So who can define what our fitra is? We'll make this a little interactive since it's 8 o'clock and I would normally be in my pajamas. So, like it's late, so we'll make it interactive.
It's the default, basically, morals that we have.
Yeah, the default morals that we have. Good. Any other definitions?
It's the motive to do the good stuff. For us humans, we were created, we have bad desires, and we have motives to do what's good. So we usually call what's good to do fitrah.
Yeah, absolutely. So our motivation to do what's right rather than to give into our desires. Good. Go ahead.
I think it's what a child would do if we give them the option to do stuff.
If the option that a child would do what?
Yeah, like it's physically what a child would do because all the child are born with it.
Right. The idea of some of the scholars said that if there was a person who, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created and lived like without any interaction with society, they would naturally turn in worship to a supreme being. They would naturally turn in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not going to know how to pray, right? They're not going to know the movements. They're not going to know Surah Al-Fatiha. They're not going to know the details, but their heart will naturally be inclined to knowing that there is a creator. That's what fitrah is something that we're born with that naturally inclines us toward what's good. And that it's like, in English, it'd be like your conscience, right? It's your moral compass. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with each of these. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created each of us with a fitrah. And so what happens is that sometimes our fitrah shifts. The more we make choices that are not aligned with the standards of Allah, the more our fitrah shifts toward going along with our desires. Right? And that it gets easier and easier. So think about the first time, think about something that you struggle with, right? The first time you did it, how did you feel? Let's see the sisters. How did you feel the first time? Think about anything that you struggle with that's like, it's not a good choice. We all have these, right? It's not a good choice. The first time you did it, how did you feel? Horrible, right? The second time. the third time, the fourth time. How do you feel like the fourth time? It's a little less horrible, right? It's not as big of a deal, right? That is our fitrah gradually quieting down because we're not listening to it, right? We're ignoring it. So that's the point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like society standards are always changing and fluctuating. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala standards are objective and stable. And if we follow that stability, our fitrah stays stable too. Our heart and our soul and our ruh stays stable because we're not giving into our desires or our nafs, right? So, you know, a lot of times our doubts revolve around personal desires, right? Wearing hijab, like, oh, what are they going to think if I wear hijab? Will I ever be able to get married if I put on the hijab, right? Like all of these doubts and questions. You know, praying, if I don't really feel it, then is it even worth it? Does Allah want me to even pray if I don't really feel it in my heart, right? Or what's the big deal if I have this relationship with this person? It's not really such a big deal. Everybody does it, right? These are the doubts that within them are our desires, and those desires come from the society that we live in. And it's natural to have those desires. But in Surah Al-Furqan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, have you seen the one who takes as his God his own desires? What does that mean? What does that mean? What? Have you seen the one who takes as his God his own desire? What does that mean? Who has an idea? He became a slave to his desires, right? That the desires became more important than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because who's our God? Allah. But if we choose to follow our desires, then we're choosing our desires as our God. And that's very intense when you think about it, subhanAllah. So like we said, the society standards are always going to change. And if we change along with them, we lose pieces of ourselves along the way. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and hold onto the rope of Allah and do not become divided. Holding onto the rope of Allah allows us to have a sense of stability and safety, in that we're not constantly fluctuating in what we need to do and the changes that we need to make. And so one of the things as Muslims to realize is that the normalization of something does not mean that it is correct. The standards of people are always going to change, and they're not necessarily correct. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ reassures us. He said that Islam began as something strange, and it will return to being something strange, so give glad tidings to the strangers. Going with the flow and following these standards of society is not always a good thing. And we see this in the Quran, where look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about most people. He says, and however most people do not know, and most people do not show gratitude, and most people do not believe, right? That's most people. And look at how he talks about the few. And few of my servants are grateful, and none had believed with him except a few. And in the gardens of bliss in Jannah, there's a large company of the former people and a few of the later people, right? So being amongst the few, being a stranger, is not a bad thing. It's something that you should be proud of. Holding on to a view that might be unpopular, it's not something negative. It's something that makes you from amongst the few that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about. And that's something to really hold on to and feel honored by, right? And it is uncomfortable, right? And so in therapy, we deal a lot with discomfort, right? We call it distress tolerance, being able to tolerate situations that feel stressful. And that's one of the keys in therapy. That's one of the keys to growth, right? I actually heard, it was a rabbi who said this, where he talked about how a lobster, when it grows, right, it knows that it needs to change its shell when it starts to feel uncomfortable. And so this discomfort is the impetus that it needs to create a change, and in order to fully grow. Because what happens if it stays in its shell? What happens if this lobster stays in its current shell? It's going to be stunted, right? It's going to get deformed. It could potentially die, right? And so growth requires some discomfort to push us toward change. So whenever you're stuck with a decision where, okay, I feel really uncomfortable. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prefers this decision, but it feels really hard and it feels really uncomfortable, that is your signal that you're growing. That is your signal that, am I going to shed the shell, or am I going to suffocate in the shell that I'm currently stuck in, right? Am I going to allow myself to grow and progress as a Muslim, or am I going to stay stuck in that shell and choose the standards of people that are putting me into a box, right? And so even though we know that we're prioritizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we know that that's good, it doesn't always feel good. And that's okay. It's okay when it doesn't always feel good, because that's your indication that you are picking long-term growth and long-term reward rather than temporary comfort. And that's the key, right? A lot of times, what do, right? When we're struggling, we try to find comfort in things that are going to temporarily make us feel good, right? You go and you have that chocolate cake, you binge watch Netflix, you know, all of these like things that are not necessarily the best thing, and then you end up like feeling worse, right? So you choose long-term growth and long-term reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather than choosing temporary comfort.
Sorry.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Okay, is that better? I'll put it close. Is that good? Yeah? All right. Bismillah. Okay. And so if you're struggling with any types of doubts, right? Like the whys. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, decree this? Why am I going through this? Why did Allah say that we have to do this? All of these things. It's, you know, that thought, it's just a passing thought, right? It's up to you how much power you want to give to that thought. And realize that those thoughts don't make you who you are. They don't define your Islam. They don't define you as a Muslim, because you are who you choose to be. One of the beautiful things about Islam is it separates between the desire to sin and the sin itself. They're two separate things. And even with making a mistake and fault, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, you know, all forgiving. And we know that, right? He's all merciful, all forgiving. But we are, in every realm of our lives, we are normal human beings who will struggle with the decision between what's easy and what's hard. And that is normal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He showed us two ways, two paths. And so when we're confronted with the path, are we going to choose the path of, you know, like ease and being accepted by everybody and pleasing everybody? Or are we going to choose the path that's most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And reframing this struggle, right? When we experience a desire to sin, is that inherently a bad thing? Is it wrong if you are struggling with a desire to sin in some way, right? Like you're struggling with the idea of, you know, should I keep on my hijab or should I take it off? Or I really like that girl, I really like that guy, and I want to pursue it and everything, right? Is there something wrong with that feeling? You guys tell me. Is there something wrong with that feeling?
I don't think there's something wrong, but it might like mean that you're close to that sin
Mm-hmm.
because you have a strong desire.
Good. What else? What other thoughts, sisters? What do you think? Is it wrong to have that feeling? Mhm. As a human being, no. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So if you have the feeling and follow through with the choice to take action on those feelings, that's where that's right. Exactly. And so excellent points that you're all making. So and I think your point is really good too, because a strong inclination towards something, one thing you have to be careful of is we're not held accountable for our thoughts, but we are held accountable for our choice to ruminate on those thoughts, right? So if you're making a choice to sit there and daydream about, all of these things that are not appropriate Islamically, right? That can be problematic. But the desire itself, the passing thought itself, is not problematic as long as you don't act upon it. And if you reframe it, right, you can actually use that struggle to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? How can a desire that is completely haram, right? Like if you were to act on it, it's haram. Like, you're not allowed to do it. How can that desire actually bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Excellent. What am I exposing myself to, right, that could be contributing to this? Is there something I can change? Good. What else? Brothers, how do you think that a desire like this could bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Might be like every time you get that desire, it's like a cue to, I don't know, read some Quran or something.
Excellent. Exactly. If you pair that desire with turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua, seeking istighfar, like saying, I seek your forgiveness, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, right? Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for strength, then that, like, these desires are just a test. They're just a test. And the purpose of any test is to see, are you going to get closer to Allah or are you going to get further away? And if you make the choice to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's really amazing because you're really passing that test, mashallah, right? So one more thing that I think is important to mention is when you feel a distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you're struggling with these doubts, or you find yourself changing bit by bit based on the social circle that you're in and wanting to make sure that this person is happy with you and things like that, one of the things to prioritize with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your relationship with Him is to take action, because we have a misconception that our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is based on how we feel. How connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you feel, right? And feelings are transient. They change a lot. And you know, I'm a therapist, so obviously I work with feelings a lot. Like, you know, that everybody says, you know, when you go to therapy, the therapist just asks, well, and how did that make you feel? And how did that make you feel, right? It's not all we do, but it's an important part. Like, feelings are important, but they're not the most important. Because one day you will find yourself feeling so angry about something or so anxious about something. You guys, a lot of you have midterms coming up. You're probably anxious about it, thinking about studying and all of these things. But you know what? In a week, you're not going to remember that anxiety once you're done with this test, right? In a year, if I asked you when you were sitting at this talk, do you remember what you were feeling anxious about? You're not going to remember, you know, because emotions change and they fluctuate. So our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only based on how we feel. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, faith is knowledge in the heart, words on the tongue, and action with the limbs. There is so much, and scholars have talked about like all the different ways that iman, faith, can manifest, and the vast majority have to do with action, have to do with the tongue, and have to do with the limbs. And so a lot of time, like, think about a relationship in your life that you really care about. And think about when you feel distant from this person, how do you manage it? How do you navigate it? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with distance from somebody that you care about? I'll ask you guys for real. How do you deal with distance? Mm-hmm. Good. Absolutely. So communication with that person, right? Yeah. Good. What else might you do? Like, you know, you get into an argument with your spouse or with a, you know, like you were disrespectful to your parents, right? How do you deal with it? What do you do? Ask for forgiveness. Good. Good.
Give an apology.
Yep. Apology. Good. You might buy them a gift. You might, you know, all of these different things, right? You might feel distant from a friend and you might send them a text to hang out and spend more time together, right? Relationships take work. And if you feel distant in a relationship with anybody, it takes work to fix that. It takes action and effort. And the same is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you feel distant, if we feel distant from Him, we take action. In that ayah that I reminded you guys of in the beginning, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we know your heart is distressed about what they say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes that ayah saying, but celebrate the praises of your Lord and be of those who prostrate themselves in adoration. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prescribing something with the tongue and something with the limbs, right? He's prescribing action to be able to deal with this feeling. That is a struggle. And so that's something that we also have to do. And also to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala obviously is the highest, and he's unlike any other creation. So with your parents, with a spouse, with a friend, right? You try things, they may or may not work, they may or may not appreciate it, they may or may not accept your apology. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah says, whoever comes with a good deed will get the reward of how much? One good deed equals 10, at least, right? And even more. And whoever comes with a bad deed, an evil deed, how many times? One. It's counted once, right? And, or he will be forgiven. And whoever draws close to me by the length of a hand, I will draw close to him by the length of an arm. Whoever draws close to me by the length of an arm, I will draw close to him by the length of a fathom. Whoever comes to me walking, I will come to him running. Whoever meets me with enough sins to fill the earth, not associating any idols with me, I will meet him with as much forgiveness. Who in our lives would do that? Right? You do one thing, and they multiply it 10 by up to 700 times. Imagine the one time you do the dishes for your mom, and she thanks you like 700 times. I can't imagine it because it would never happen, right? and imagine the one mistake that you make, like it's almost as if it's nothing. It's okay. And if you seek forgiveness, it's completely erased. How many people in our lives don't turn that mistake back and it's like, you remember that time 10 years ago that you did this and you said this, right? People do this, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different. And so if you feel distant or disconnected from him, it just takes one step and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take so many more steps toward you, right? And so and it's a reminder that we try so hard to please people, and so many times they're not pleased. No matter what you do, there's going to be somebody that's not happy, right? There's always going to be somebody that is happy with your choice and somebody that's unhappy with your choice. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you do something he's so clear about what will make him reward you, what will make him proud of you, right? And so when we make that choice to prioritize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the end, we are truly prioritizing ourselves, right? Because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, is that, when you do one good thing and he multiplies it by so much, and there's nobody else who does that. So when we make that choice to hold ourselves only to the standard of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're giving ourselves psychological health, spiritual health, and we're giving ourselves goodness, inshallah, in the hereafter. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all clarity and the ability to live by the standards that he puts forth and to be able to deal with people. Oh, and I'll mention one hadith that just popped into my head because I think it's helpful when you're dealing with people and wanting to please people. It's the idea that every heart, all the hearts of people are between the two fingers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he turns those hearts any way that he wants. And so if we really want people to be pleased with us, another one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he loves you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this above the heavens, tells the angel Jibreel, I love so-and-so, so love him or her. And then angel Jibreel goes and tells all of the angels, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves this person, I love them too, and they will love them too. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spreads goodwill across the earth for all of creation to love that person. And so in the end, when we want people to be pleased with us, we want people to love us, that love is a provision, and it is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes we're choosing to prioritize a source that can't actually give that to us rather than prioritizing the source that can. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have the ability to prioritize him and to worship him in the best of ways. And I also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow his mercy and safety on the people of Syria and Turkey who are suffering right now. And keep them in your dua, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I think we have some time for questions, do we? Yeah. Sure, go ahead. Yes, there's a hadith about that. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that that every child is born on the fitrah, but their parents change their faith. So their parents might make them Christian or Jewish or like to a different faith. So every child is born with a natural inclination, but it changes based on environmental factors too. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Go ahead. Oh. Oh, in Arabic. I would have to search it in Arabic. But because my Arabic is not strong enough to be able to translate off the top of my head. Hmm. Yes. Yes, yeah.
But when we think about something good, we are like have the intention to do it, but we don't have the chance to do it. Actually, it counts as
Yes.
joy for us, right?
SubhanAllah, that's such a good reminder because that's also a hadith and it's a beautiful reminder that when you have a good intention to do something and you don't do it, you still get a reward for it. If you have a bad intention to do something but you don't do it, you get a reward for that too. SubhanAllah. So it's there's, and then if you have a good intention, you follow through, you get even more reward. And then if you have a bad intention and you do it, you get a sin for that. Yeah. Good questions, mashallah. So a sister was just bringing up the hadith about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we have a bad intention, we intend to do something bad, but then we make the choice not to, we're not held accountable for that bad intention because we've chosen not to do it. And you can actually get rewarded for the choice to change your mind, right? So the bad intention itself is not, because you choose not to follow through on it, you don't get punished for it. And then if you have a good intention, but you end up not being able to do it, you still get rewarded for that good intention. That's a beautiful reminder. Jazakallah khair. Good. Good. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, you talked a lot about like making sure you're on good terms with Allah before you're on good terms with other people.
Mm.
So I think that's like, it's kind of, I would say, but it's a lot easier said than done. So what are some things that we can do in order to make sure that we do that?
I think that's a great question, mashallah, because and it's not, so we prioritize being on good terms with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala above everything. But being on good terms with people can be a way of being on good terms with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too. Right, so especially with regards to family, for example, right? There's so many hadith about people who maintain the bonds of kinship, and that being something that is so rewarded in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But to keep it simple, one of the things that I think is most helpful is first getting to know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So going through the names of Allah, understanding what they mean, looking into the verses and things like that, but really understanding the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then looking at your life and seeing how do you see these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resonate and manifest in your life. That builds an attachment, because all of this comes down to feeling attached and being connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you can't really be connected to someone that you don't know. So I would say the first step is getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And knowing yourself personally, what are you motivated by, right? I think one of the beauties of the Quran is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala balances it, right? Where there's so many ayat about Jannah and the beauties of Jannah, but it's balanced with the fear of the hellfire and the punishment of the hellfire. So think about what you're motivated by and look into the ayat. I would say having a relationship with the Quran is a direct way to have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too. So, and then one other thing too is having an intention for the small things. So when you're walking to school, right, I'm intending to seek knowledge for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Making a dua, oh Allah, surround me by people who are going to bring me closer to you, right? Whenever you do something that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase you in these types of good deeds, right? This is a dua the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. I would say just look for like three small things that you can do. Like one of the things I do is I do my dhikr when I'm doing dishes or laundry. And the reason why is because I'm always doing dishes and laundry because I have kids. So like find something that you do often. If you're walking on campus and things like that, use that as time to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can be in some like really, really simple, small ways, inshallah. Great question. Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
These measures melt,
Mm.
and they melt gradually
Mhm.
in ways that at some point people do not feel where they are. What are the measures? How this measure changes.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that's why I saw some people who left the hijab, or we're praying, but now they are not praying. You know, when we are in Muslim community, we try to appeal. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the sincerity of the iman. So what's your advice for sisters, for brothers, you know, to make sure that they reevaluate standards and measures in ways that they are still attaching to the right path?
It's an excellent, excellent question, mashallah. Because that's the reality, right? That's the way that shaitan gets to us. You know, if you're somebody who is praying 5 prayers a day and all the sunnah prayers associated with those prayers and things like that, shaitan is not going to come to you and say, stop praying, right? That's not what shaitan's going to do. What's the first step is he's going to say, you don't need those 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib. Just, you're busy. Like, just hurry up and finish, right? And then you don't need those others. And little by little, they gradually go down. He comes to us in the small steps, in the small, sneaky ways, right? And we all have this experience with some aspects of our lives, right? He comes at us in the small, sneaky ways. So one of the pieces of advice that, with regards to that, is try and surround your acts of worship with as much cushion as you can, as many obstacles as you can for shaitan to have to get through to get you to give up on the actual fard act of worship, right? Where, you know, increase your sunnah prayers and stuff. These are all protections. But in terms of actually understanding, because a lot of times the steps are so gradual that we don't realize that we are getting further and further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that really one of the main solutions to that is to try and increase in knowledge, right? So coming to gatherings like this, where there are reminders and everything, taking classes, but also reading the Quran, like as little as you can manage, like do it on a daily basis to connect with it, and do it in a way that you can understand it, right? So even if it's like one page, like you're like, I'm not going to go to sleep until I read my 1 page with the meaning. It's something that cleanses your heart, because all of these small steps in moving away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like these little black dots. That's the way the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam describes it. Little black dots on our hearts. But reciting the Quran and connecting with the Quran gradually washes that away. Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every single day for guidance. And we do that in our prayers, you know, where we ask Allah, ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, in every single rak'ah, right? But asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala consciously, like, if I'm doing something that I don't know is displeasing to you, then give me clarity. Give me clarity to understand that and guide me, right? Because so I think those are just some simple things that we can do. But really, it's hard to reconnect with the accurate measures without seeking some knowledge. Like, I think that's going to be an essential component. Yeah. And if anybody else has suggestions on that has worked for them, it would be great. Oh, absolutely.
That's why where I appreciate that Islamic community and these wonderful young men together and young ladies together, where they can catch and support.
Absolutely. It's transformative. It's transformative, subhanAllah. That's where my own personal journey in learning about Islam and loving Islam, it came from my MSA in college, subhanAllah. You know, I'm sure many of you have that experience. Yeah. Good. Good. Any other questions, last minute questions, or we're good?
So you just said that Allah has endless forgiveness, right?
Mm.
So, and people are not. So what about the sins we do towards people? Because I just remember that we might generate, not even that we hurt someone, and this forgiveness could only based on this, right? So what we do to erase this sin without seeking it
So, so she's asking about seeking for forgiveness from people too, right? And so that's absolutely,
Brothers, if you could please stop talking so we can actually hear it, that would be greatly appreciated. Sorry.
thank you. So the sister is asking about, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endless forgiveness, but people don't. Now, what if you have done something to hurt someone else? Like, how do you seek their forgiveness, especially if you don't know, right? So in a lot of cases, we know when we've done something that we shouldn't do, right? And seeking forgiveness from that person and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that we're not held to account in the hereafter, it's much better to hold ourselves to account now than in the hereafter. So we seek forgiveness from that person when we know we've done something wrong. If you don't know you've done something wrong, right, make dua, right? Like if I've ever wronged anybody, then help me to make amends, help me to fix it, or, forgive me for that, help that person to forgive me for that, make dua. But if you don't know that you've hurt somebody, as adults, it is that adult's responsibility to let you know that they've been hurt. If it's not obvious, it is their responsibility to let you know, hey, what you did was not okay. A lot of times the things that are fine for us are offensive to another person, but you can't predict that with everybody. So as adults, and this is important in relationships, it's like, you always see those funny videos of like the wife who's giving the silent treatment to the husband and he has no idea what's wrong and everything because she didn't say it. She has to. He has to. In relationships, for them to work, you have to communicate. And this person can't hold you responsible for something you didn't even know. You didn't have an ill intent or anything. Unless they talk to you about it and then you ignore it, then that's something you have to work on. But otherwise, what can you do? You can't do anything about people who don't let you know.
I'm just asking if I couldn't apologize or seek his forgiveness. Is this mistakes or sins will kept forever till Qiyamah, till this person just say that he forgive me, or it can be erasable with istighfar?
So, Allah alam, that's a little bit more of a fiqh type question that I might not have a detailed answer to.
Are and not like I cannot like remember if I just remember how many I made sin, like it would be 4
Yeah.
per day.
And we all make mistakes, right? But like we said, in our relationships, we apologize for the things that we know we've done wrong. And if that person comes to us and says, you really hurt me with this, we apologize for that too, and we try to make it better. If there's nothing else and it's impossible to apologize because you don't even know that existed, how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to hold us accountable for something we don't know, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give justice because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just, but we don't know what that justice is going to look like. But it's going to be justice. And it doesn't sound like it would be just to punish you for something you didn't do on purpose. You didn't hurt this person purposefully. You didn't even know you did it. But if that person feels hurt, they will get some sort of justice in the hereafter. We just don't know what it's like. Yeah. All right, is that? Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I once heard that, so obviously there's sins against people that you do in front of them, and then there's like back.
Yes.
And one teacher once explained that, yes, you seek forgiveness, but if they don't know you said it, you don't go up to them and announce it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Change your behavior and you seek tawbah from Allah at that point.
And you speak well of them in that same gathering. Yes, excellent point. Excellent point, mashallah. So she brought up the point of like there are sins where where you've hurt a person to their face, and then other ones where you've been backbiting about them, and then to make amends with that. If it's going to cause more harm to go and say, hey, I said something bad about you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. If that's going to cause more harm, and in a lot of relationships it would cause more harm, then don't do that. But instead, you seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You try to do good by that person. And in that same gathering where you have spoken badly about them, you start to speak well of them to make up for that, inshallah. So that's excellent point. Jazakallah khair. Yeah.
Can you give is there a way to give sadaqah on behalf of those you've wronged, so as a way?
That's a beautiful intention, to give sadaqah on behalf of somebody that you've wronged. And to make dua for them, right? For you're giving them such a beautiful gift in comparison to the harm that you've caused, this gift is even more beautiful. There was an imam, who was it? I can't remember which imam it was, but he said that when I find out that somebody has been backbiting about me, I go to their house with a platter of dates to thank them for all the hasanat, the good deeds I'm gonna have on my scales on the Day of Judgment. And so it's a good reframe too. And so if we're making dua for that person, it's a beautiful reward for them too, inshallah. Yeah. Jazakumullah khair, everybody.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. We will be serving Dave's outside in the parking lot inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
أي واحدة تبعت السجادة.
Yalla. It's hers, I think. Anyway, three things. Yalla.
Three things?
No.
What do you think? Where's your dad? ده سألك ده؟ نعم فك ده فكها؟ فك أي واحدة؟ ده هاي أفك هاي بتحكي عن هاي يعني فيها أقول لك بشيء اصبر الهلال بكرة كم بإذن الله أنا جالدين ريال مدريد بكرة بإذن الله ريال مدريد راح يفوزوا أكيد لا حنا الهلال بنجد ريال مدريد حلو هذه ريال مدريد راح يفوزوا علمك يا رجال ما لها فريق عربي ما لها رجالها ما لها رجالها الهلال بإذن الله كفار ريال مدريد دول ما يسوون شيء
مدريد اصلا كانت مدينه مسلمه المسلمين اللي عملوها اسمها مصريت الله ولكن هم احتلوها يعني الله فانا بشجع ريال مدريد تعاطفا مع الاخوه امال
انا مدريد يا عمر ايوه بس الريدي قدام الهلال يعقب صراحه معليش خسي
هو تركي الشيخ مشجع
لا الهلال ولا غير مدريد اجيب لا مدريد ولا غير
الشيخ هيشجع مين؟
انا الشيخ انت الاسلام
تركي الشيخ لا ده مش
اسمع لا اسمع حرف عليه يرحم لي والدك
بلاش تجيب في سيرته عشان لو جبت في سيرته هناخد حساسيات كتير قوي. اسكت.
لا تجيب سيرة تركي الشيخ
انا بس عايز
عنك
لا تتكلم انا كده ماشي ليه عايز انا مش هتكلم عنه بس عايز اعرف ليه بس
عنك عنه يا عمر.